Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews. My name is Alyssa, and this is my video for my favorite, most influential trans celebrities or characters. So I'm just looking at trans women, trans representation out there in the world, out there in the media. So I'm including real life people and also fictional characters who are trans, but generally played by trans actresses. So I had the idea for this video because I wanted to do something a little positive. I wanted to do kind of the opposite type of video that I did a while back when I did how media affected my trans identity, and I was talking about how films and television and just the media in general like had a negative impact on me as a closeted trans person when I was a teenager and growing up. So this is the flip side of that. Also, you know, there's a lot of bad news going on, unfortunately, in the trans community. I'm not going to get into it too much, but there's a recent executive order in Texas. Texas is terrible. Well, Greg Abbott is terrible. Specifically, Texas, there's lots of Texans who are very cool. So I'm not talking about Texas as a whole state, but their government is certainly pretty terrible towards trans people. So with all of that, it is certainly easy as a trans person to just feel like there's not a lot of hope. But it is important to remember that the way that trans people are viewed and how they're presented in the media has come a very long way from the times that I was talking about in that other video that I mentioned that I did a few months ago when I was talking about the media back mostly in the 80s and 90s. Compared to now, we have made a lot of progress. Obviously, there's still a very, very long way to go. But in this video, I'm going to focus on more of the positive. So I'm going to go through 5 people, both real life people and fictional characters that I personally found influence from. And I'm going to go in chronological order from when I discovered them and when they came into my life. And 2 of them were pre-transition and the other 3 were in the early stages of my transition. So let me go ahead and get started with those 5 people. Okay, so the first person I want to talk about, believe it or not, is Caitlyn Jenner. Now, I say believe it or not because, as it turns out, she's a terrible right-wing Republican who has been more harmful to the trans community than helpful, and that is a real shame. But when I first encountered her, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that she was going to be who she was. When she came out as trans, for me personally, I hadn't heard about her since I was a kid because I did not pay any attention to any of this Kardashian bullshit. Okay, I had vaguely heard of these Kardashians, but to me, I hear that and I think of a gold ducat. The Kardashian. I don't know anything about the Kardashians. I didn't know that Caitlyn Jenner was on that show or any of that nonsense. I had no idea. What I knew Caitlyn Jenner as was the person who was on the Wheaties box when I was a little kid. So her whole Olympic thing, that was when I was like 2 years old, so I wasn't old enough for that. But she continued to be on the Wheaties box and in the Wheaties commercials into the early 1980s. And at that point, I'm like a young kid and I'm watching cartoons. And here is Caitlyn Jenner on the TV promoting Wheaties. Of course, she was always on the box. That was my parents' idea of healthy cereal. And if it tasted like cardboard, like we much rather have our sugar snaps and our Rice Krispies. But anyways, I digress. That was my familiarity with her before she came out. And when she came out as trans, it really struck me that, hold on. So isn't she like in her like 50s or 60s or something? Like, you can do that. You can come out as trans that late in life. 'Cause at this point, I'm in my early 40s, and uh, in my mind, it is too late. The ship has sailed. Like, it's something you need to do when you're younger, or it's just too late. And I was very firmly set on that in my head. That there was no going back now. It's way too late. In my 40s, I'm an old person now. Like, I can't transition now. So when Caitlyn Jenner came out, I was like, oh, wait, that's a thing. You're allowed to do that. um, and after that, to be fair, I still kind of used my age as an excuse, somewhat. Just because Caitlyn Jenner did it didn't mean that I could. Then a few years later, a friend of mine, someone I know in real life, is my age, and then came out as trans. And then I was like, okay, I'm running out of that. I can't use that excuse anymore. And I came out a couple years after that. But when the wheels started turning on that for the first time is when Caitlyn Jenner came out. It is a terrible shame that she turned into someone who is, frankly, destructive for the trans community. And I hope one day she turns it around. She's got to realize that the people that she's sucking up to hate her. We dislike her as trans people because of the damage she does to the trans community, but there are Republicans who just hate her. There was a video of her at the CPAC last year. It's like the Conservative Action Conference. I don't know what CPAC stands for, but they had one just now this year. But there was last year's, there was video of her being harassed by this guy who was calling her by her dead name and telling her to get the fuck out or whatever. They hate her, and now we don't like her either. So nobody likes her. So I think the trans community would welcome her if she said, you know what, I messed up and I'm here for you all now. I personally would, but regardless, she was one of my early influences when I started thinking about transitioning. Okay, moving on in the chronological order in the timeline of my life. The next influence is a fictional character. And when we talk about fictional characters, we're talking about not just the character, but the writers who created the character, the actress who portrays the character, and in this case, the executive producer of the show, who is also trans. Also, got to give credit to the casting for actually casting a trans actress. So, the character in question is Nomi from Sense8, played by Jamie Clayton. And of course, Lena Wachowski was the creator of this character, who said that she put a lot of her self into this character. There's a lot of autobiographical information in this character. And Jamie Clayton, of course, is trans herself. She was a model before, and also an actress now. And this is an example of why representation is so very important. In contrast to when I was a teenager and did not see myself on television, and in fact, if I did see anything resembling myself, it was mocked and belittled, which made me feel really bad about my trans identity. This was positive representation. Here is this character who is part of this group of 8. I'm not going to get into the details of that plot if you haven't seen it. Season 1 is good. You should check out season 1. Season 2 is crap, but season 1 is good. Anyways, she's just part of this group, this collective of people, and she's just a regular, normal person. And it was important for me to see that. This was about 2016. This is, I think, about a year after, or a few months after Caitlyn Jenner. So around that same time, I'm kind of thinking about my trans identity. At the time, I was still married, so I wasn't going to come out anytime soon. But seeing myself on screen was extraordinarily important to me. So I cannot understate how important representation actually really is. And I think that this goes across multiple minority groups, or press groups of people. I was just watching earlier this interview with Whoopi Goldberg about Star Trek and how when she was a little girl, seeing Uhura and seeing that representation in the future was really, really influential to her. And so I think it goes across the board that representation is important. Seeing Naomi on screen was very, very impactful for me. Okay, next one is Laverne Cox. Now you might be thinking, but Alyssa, she was in Orange is the New Black before Jamie Clayton was in Sense8. Well, I never watched Orange is the New Black, so I was not familiar with Laverne Cox. I was not familiar with that particular trans representation. For me, the first really major trans representation I saw in a TV show was in Sense8. So my entry about Laverne Cox comes actually after I started transitioning. She had done a documentary on Netflix called Disclosure, which is still on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. And that was actually the first time I had really heard of her, to be perfectly honest, just because I never watched Orange is the New Black. I'm sorry, I didn't watch it. This documentary was so amazing to see right as I'm transitioning, because it is basically, I was watching that and I was like, oh my God, that's my life they're talking about. So the documentary is about how media and movies and television have portrayed transition or trans people throughout history, and how it affects real trans people. And there's multiple trans people who interview. A lot of them are trans actresses themselves and trans actors, as there's trans men in this documentary as well. And it's really, really well done. And I ended up doing the video that I mentioned earlier where I did how media affected my trans identity. That was kind of my personal version of Disclosure, just talking about me personally, whereas Disclosure is broader in scope and talks about all kinds of different folks and all kinds of different trans representation in the media. When it came out, right as I'm transitioning and right as I'm coming out to my family, I was like, hey, watch Disclosure. That's what I can tell all of my family members and friends. That's me. That's totally me. If you want to know what it was like especially for my family who, knew me when I was younger, if you want to know what it was like for me when I was a teenager, watch that documentary. So it was huge. Since that time, I've gotten to know a little bit more about Laverne Cox, and I've just come to absolutely adore her. She's so amazing. And I actually recently watched a Netflix show called Inventing Anna, which she is in. And she's awesome in that. She's so cool. And she plays a cis woman. And so I really appreciate that they can cast trans actresses now, not only as trans women, which, in my opinion, trans characters should always be played by trans actresses since they don't have a lot of work to begin with. But that you can also, cast them as cis characters, which I'm pretty sure is what she's playing in Inventing Anna, and I love her in that show. I actually really like that show overall. But anyways, I don't want to get sidetracked. So Laverne Cox, primarily for that wonderful documentary Disclosure, is the next influential person on my list. Right when I was starting to transition, which was a very, very key time. Okay, so the next big one for me was about 4 months into my transition. I'd been on HRT roughly 4 months, and Elliott Page came out, and he wrote the most touching, beautiful coming out letter. It was published all over the internet, and it was so touching, and I could just feel it. I could really feel where he was coming from. And the fact that he talked about himself first, but then went on to address all of the, horrible things that trans people have to deal with, and made it very clear that he is going to be an advocate for the trans community. He's going to use his platform, his status as a Hollywood actor to to speak up for trans folk all around the world, and I was so touched by that. It just felt so good to have this ally who does have a really big platform. Kind of the opposite of Caitlyn Jenner. He's actually is using his influence to stand up for the trans community, and I absolutely loved it. Plus, I have always admired him as an actor. I'd actually just before, not too long before he wrote that letter and he came out, I had watched both seasons of The Umbrella Academy. And quite honestly, I didn't really understand why he was in that show because he's a way better actor than anyone else in that show. But he was the clear standout, the queer as well, but the clear highlight of that show. I've always admired him as an actor. So to have him come out in that way was touching. It was reassuring. It was affirming. All of that stuff. And I don't remember exactly when this was, but there was a point where there was a picture of him shirtless that was released, and just the pure euphoria that if you're trans, you look at that picture and you can feel it. The euphoria that is experiencing with the shirtless picture. Even though as a trans woman, what I'm going for is the exact opposite of that. I want more boobs, not lack of boobs. It doesn't matter. The feeling is the same. I think that euphoria, the feeling is probably pretty universal. The reasons for feeling it are completely different for each individual, not even just between trans men and trans women, but between each individual person, the reasons for feeling it can vary. But I could tell just by the look on his face in that picture that the feeling is what I feel when I feel gender euphoria, and it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I hope that cis people as well were able just to feel that just by looking at that picture, even if they haven't experienced a specific gender euphoria. You've experienced what it's like to be euphoric, what it's like to be really happy. Hopefully, I hope you have. So hopefully it comes through in that picture. But to me, it's just really, really beautiful. And I absolutely adore Elliott Page. I did before he came out as trans. And now he's basically one of my heroes. No big deal. And the fifth influential trans person that I want to talk about is another trans character. And this one is Jules on the show Euphoria. And she is played by an actress, Hunter Schafer, who actually hadn't acted before this role. She was a trans model. And Euphoria Season 1 came out in 2019 before I transitioned, but I didn't watch it until 2021. So that's why it's in this part of the chronological order. The Elliott Page thing would have been late 2020, and me personally watching Euphoria for the first time would have been early in 2021. And I was really thankful for, first of all, that they got a trans actress once again to play a trans role, but also the way that she was portrayed. At least in season 1, I have some serious issues with how she was used in season 2. I did my Euphoria season 2 review last week. Plug. I'll put a link to that at the end of this video, along with the other videos that I mentioned. I'll put links to them at the end of this video. Yeah, as I mentioned in my Euphoria Season 2 review, I feel like they unfortunately relegated her to a supporting role, and she didn't have her own voice, her own story, which was disappointing, because in Season 1, this, again, was the representation that I need to see. What I really appreciated most about how this character was used in Season 1 of Euphoria was that she is not defined by her trans identity as a character. She is kind of just a teenager, like all of the other teenagers going through teenager problems, but simultaneously they are not erasing her trans identity, as her trans identity is an additional teenage problem that she has that the other characters don't. But it's not all about her struggling as a trans person. For the most part, the other characters just kind of treat her like any other girl, which is really good to see. So she's neither defined as a trans person, nor is her trans identity erased. At least in season 1. I kind of feel like they erased her trans identity in season 2, but I'm talking about season 1. This is early 2021 for me watching this. And as a bonus, they did these 2 bonus episodes in between seasons 1 and 2. The second of which was just an hour of Jules sitting there talking to a therapist, and that is some of the absolute best trans representation I've ever seen on TV, which makes it even more disappointing that they didn't really use her well in season 2. But if you have not seen that episode, even if you haven't watched Euphoria, I feel like you could just watch that episode and just be, oh, there's a trans girl with talking to her therapist. Definitely would help to have the context of the show, but I highly recommend that episode. And I highly recommend season 1 of Euphoria if you haven't seen it. Okay, that about wraps up my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you will subscribe if you have not already. And please like this video. And please join me next week, March 18th, for my HRT update. It's a big one because I'm getting my estrogen levels checked next Tuesday. So the video on Friday will be an update on that. So check that out. Check out all of my previous transition videos and check out my other content. If you are into Star Trek, check that out. If you are into Euphoria, I did the review on that. Check that out. All right, everybody. I will see you very soon. Goodbye.